Viewpoints on the Talk Station FM 107.1. And joining us this afternoon, a topic we normally talk on Mondays, but because yesterday was a special event with Memorial Day and my Memorial Day interviews with the Slape family, we have joining us this afternoon Pastor Patrick Whaley, First Methodist Church in Morehead City, and we're talking with him about his experience in Ukraine, but also the situation in Ukraine. And as I mentioned at the opening of the program, it doesn't look all that positive right now. And well, with that, Pastor, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Lockwood and Ross.
So I mentioned casually our conversation last week with the young lady who's living in South Carolina. She is a Ukrainian, and she moved here, or she and her family moved here to live with their grandfather, who immigrated here from Ukraine. He was a dangerous individual. He was a builder. A builder of churches, and the ultimate Methodist churches. I mean, really. He's got to be on somebody's watch list.
And so from Ukraine, moved to Hungary part of the time, and then came back to Western Ukraine and started churches in Western Ukraine. And we're talking about Soviet Union days.
Wow. Okay.
Of doing that.
You, we were talking about this off air. You were in Ukraine and Soviet Union and Slovakia and Poland and Belarus and other locations. You got arrested 5 times.
Yes, sir. In Russia. All in Russia.
All in Russia.
Mm-hmm.
By just being a dangerous Methodist pastor.
Correct. Thinking that I was somebody that I wasn't, but being watched closely. One of those was in Kaliningrad. I mean, and 4 other cities in Russia, accused of being a spy, basically. And so it was put on trial.
Really?
Short trial.
Really?
It was always the same. It was always for KGB, or now known as FSB, personnel that would come and surround you and try to parade you around as many people as possible before being taken to the police station. And, I mean, that parade was a big part of the whole situation. But, yes, you were in front of the judge, and the 4 policemen were there, 3 bad cops, 1 good cop. The 1 good cop kept on saying, if you just sign this sheet of paper, everything will be okay. Or let me talk for you in front of the judge. And would you do that? Absolutely not. And so...
No, but you see, I'm totally ignorant about the circumstances associated with something like that. So I know, and we have right now a Wall Street Journal journalist who's incarcerated in Russia.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right, which wonderful people. The Russians are just, I know, I guess I really shouldn't be that broad. Russians are probably very nice people, and I'm saying that sincerely. But the government, the elite, the kleptocrats, the mafia, that's really what they are. They are.
And let me say loud and clear, I have many very, very close friends that live in Russia. Many wonderful churches that we planted are still existing and serving in marvelous ways, sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ throughout Russia. So I have lots of wonderful things to say. But the government is something different that the Russian people have learned to live with, and that I learned to live with.
All right. We're talking about the situation now, of course, in Ukraine. And, of course, I say last night, actually probably 2 days ago, due to time changes and so forth, there was an attack in Russia, theoretically a drone attack that began or was initiated in Ukraine by Ukrainians. That's the assumption. Of course, let me just make also note that Kyiv and the port, Odessa, have both been bombed.
And many other places throughout Ukraine.
So
for the last 3 days, all during the day and at nighttime, people have been staying in the subway systems for the last 3 days.
Of course, the anticipation is there's going to be a counteroffensive. What are you hearing in your conversations? And by the way, he's in touch with, as a matter of fact, to the extent that last week we were talking with 2 of his associates, I say associates, friends, contacts in the Ukraine. One was in Slovakia.
Correct.
And the other one was in eastern Ukraine.
Western Ukraine.
Western Ukraine. Yeah.
But was from the city of Kyiv.
Right.
Was born and raised in the city of Kyiv.
So you're keeping in touch. What are you hearing at this point? And by the way, before I go any further, the point and the reason for this conversation, ladies and gentlemen, is we're constantly reminding our audience and the country, I hope they're listening to the program, that we're looking to give aid to, and I use the word, the innocents, the infirm, the elderly, the very young, the children, the mothers, those that are staying behind out of necessity or inability to move. Necessity because they are providing services to the front lines. They are actually doing work. So these are the folks that are not getting the military aid. The military aid isn't designated for them. It's not designated for that 2-year-old or that 1-year-old that's just now, learning to take on semi-solids and things of this nature. So that's what we're doing. We're raising awareness and hopefully funds by sending that money to First Methodist Church in Morehead City, and that's 900 Arundel Street, Morehead City, North Carolina, 28557. So that's the reason we're doing this. So go ahead.
Yeah, and let me say thank you for last week to you. As we heard from people that live there, that are in ministry over there, of the orphanages they've started.
That's right.
Because of so many fathers being killed as soldiers in the war, and mothers and grandmothers
that have been killed too. Yeah,
being killed too in the apartments and everything. So the orphanages that are being started. You heard about the psychological and emotional and spiritual needs of all these people that have seen death, that have experienced death, that have moved from their homes in eastern Ukraine, coming to western Ukraine. And so not only are we supplying a place to live in these apartment warehouses that we've changed into apartment buildings, and the food and medicines and everything they need, but the psychological and the spiritual aspect of that. Being able to buy the food and medicines and supplies, the generators back in the winter months in Slovakia, and then taking them over to eastern Ukraine, close to where the battlefields are located. So these are individuals that are risking their own lives and going over there with the money that you give that is sent over, 100% sent over. So the powerful difference that I hope you heard last week and again today that you're making in the lives of the innocents that are there.
And by the way, 2 things. One, recovery will be that much faster if the people in Ukraine, not the Ukraine, in Ukraine, are capable of mobilizing once the Russian onslaught has stopped and they've been removed. That's important. We've got to look beyond today and anything that we can do to assist recovery quickly. And so anything that we provide today, in reality, is, if you will, is providing the probability and the possibility for quicker recovery come the eventual departure of Russia. So what are you hearing now? What you heard, you mentioned a few moments ago, the various military strikes, I guess they're rocket strikes in Ukraine.
From Iran. Purchased from Iran. I mean, not shot off from Iran.
But the military, the equipment's coming from, is Iranian.
Correct.
Okay, as its source. What's the attitude? How are they holding up? Because at this point, we know that theoretically, Bakhmut has fallen. However, the fighting has not stopped.
Correct.
And there are other regions of Donetsk that are still under attack. But we're waiting for the assault. I think the Russians are definitely preparing for an assault.
From Ukraine.
What are you hearing at this point?
Not much more than what you just said, but the people are anticipating that to happen. People are thinking that's why for the last 3 days and nights the onslaught of the bombs and everything hitting Kyiv And truly, many, many people are staying in the subway systems like they did at the beginning of the war.
You told me, and am I correct? Was it Odessa that you said that you felt that Russia would be very cautious about?
Correct.
Why?
That's historic Russia. Now, don't think long term. Remember, Kyiv was a city much, much longer, 700 years longer than what Russia's been a country, and before Moscow was founded. Kyiv celebrated this last week, and it was on Sunday, so it's when all these bombings started happening. 1,500, and I want to say 14 years of being a city.
I'm thinking there's some houses that could be plaqued, and I say that with a little tongue in cheek. Yeah, wow.
And so that's when the bombing started. Was on Kyiv Day, which was important. And so Odessa was, during the Romanovs' time period, was a place for vacations, just like Crimea. And so there's big, beautiful theaters. There's homes of Peter the Great and others in Crimea, and also in Odessa. Odessa's gorgeous.
I'm going to lay claim to being ignorant. Maybe many in the audience here at the talk station are already aware of this. We know very little about Ukraine, and of course, it's a culture. It was a center of culture, historic center for Russia for almost 500 years or thereabouts.
Correct.
And so, it's really kind of frightening that this could all be destroyed. And is there fear that this is on?
That's certainly every Ukrainian's thought of what Russia wants to do. It's just to wipe out the Ukrainian culture, wipe out the Ukrainian people, and let it go back to the days of the Soviet Union and Russia. Now, in doing some research and talking with folks when they mentioned the orphanages and orphans last week, I've been told that more than 700,000 children and youth have been taken to Russia from Mariupol and these other cities that Russia has taken over, bombed and taken over. And I've asked that question several times, but it keeps on saying 700,000. I don't know if that means 70,000, but a very, very large number of children and youth that have been taken mostly to Siberia. But this is what the Soviet Union's done to Koreans, have done to others throughout history, of taking and just whitewashing the Ukrainian culture to make it a Russian culture. I have many dear Koreans that live in Russia, and out in public, they're Russian to every extent. But at home, they sit on the floor, they eat Korean food, they speak the Korean language. But Russia's tried all these years since World War II to wipe out the Korean aspect.
This is the reason why we do this every week, and we'll be wrapping it up with Pastor Patrick Whaley. We'll probably next week do an interview with maybe someone else from Ukraine.
Okay.
We'll talk about that.
We can do that.
But this is an important story, Pastor. We have an opportunity, and we're not talking about, and I know that you have received some sizable contributions.
Yes, sir.
We're not talking about large contributions, ladies and gentlemen. Any amount will do. And by the way, literally, if you'll write on that check, and please write it through as a check, to First Methodist Church in Morehead City, 900 Arundel Street, Morehead City, North Carolina, 28557. If you $1, $10 more if you so desire, if you will write that check and put on the line, the purpose line, Ukraine, 100% of that money goes to Ukraine. They're using, and I want to give credit to First Citizens Bank, which is seeing to the transfer from the American dollar to, I guess, what's the currency there in the Ukraine? Is it ruble or?
No, it's the hryvnia.
Hryvnia.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's transferred from the dollar to the hryvnia with all of the associated expenses because you've got transfer fees, etc.
The First Citizens Bank is covering every bit of that.
Being borne by First Citizens Bank.
Yes, sir. And then as we
wow.
get it to eastern Ukraine, it's the Ukrainian banking system that's not charging anything. So they can send the money through their banking system to Kharkiv, to other cities in eastern Ukraine that's been on the news all the time and bombed so much. And they've got ATM machines. And so as long as that ATM machine's got electricity to it, our pastors and friends throughout the country can pull that money out.
I want to thank you, Pastor. I really do. And I want to thank all of you who have made contributions and been so generous. Thank you very much for doing that. And I know that we'll be continuing this conversation, sadly, unfortunately, for weeks to come. We pray only weeks to come. So with that, Pastor, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Lockwood and
our
Ross.
pleasure and our
the station.
honor. Viewpoints on the Talk Station.